Are you looking to optimize your health? Are you looking to get the best supplements at the lowest price? For high quality supplements and to talk to someone about what supplements are best for you, go to takeyoursupplements.com and one of our fantastic true health coaches will help you pick out the right supplements for you that are the highest quality and the best price. That's takeyoursupplements.com. takeyoursupplements.com. That's takeyoursupplements.com. Be sure to ask about free shipping and our awesome referral program. Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 156. I cannot tell you how excited I am to bring you today's guest. Trina Hammack is such an amazing healer. She has so much information to share with you today, and she healed her body of disease that some people spend their entire life suffering from. And I'm so thrilled that she can be here today to share with you how she ended Lyme disease and cancer and all kinds of other stuff in her body, and then went on to become an amazing healer. And what a wonderful spirit you have, and such a big heart. And I love your energy. I had a great talk with you right before we hit record, and I can tell that my listeners are going to love learning from you today.
Hey, Ashley, thank you so much for inviting me on. I'm really excited to share all sorts of information today.
Great. Well, let's just dive right in. Tell your story, because you have such an amazing story. I know our listeners are going to love hearing what you have gone through and come out the other end achieving.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's start back in 2003 when I was living in Big Sur, California, down the coast. It's gorgeous. Was living a beautiful life. I had my Rolfing practice going and everything was great. I had a young son and we lived in a beautiful place. And one day we went out mushroom hunting and I ended up with this horrendous rash, a full body rash. Basically, it started on my lower back, my sacrum area. And I went in thinking it was poison oak that had gone systemic, and they said they tried all the remedies medically for systemic poison oak, and it wasn't working. And then the symptoms started increasing and increasing, and I was almost blacking out, and I was exhausted, and I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't care for my son. And I didn't know what to do. I had no hope because every time I went to the doctor, they said, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. They said, it's all in your head.
Oh, I hate
I,
it when they do that.
I know. And I was like, no, I'm like having seizures. And I was just completely lost. I didn't know what to do. So I happened to be on the phone with a friend of mine from Minnesota, and she said that her daughter had gotten this new machine. And I'm like, what? I didn't know what she was talking about. Well, it turned out to be a very advanced biofeedback device. And she said, oh, and she can treat you remotely from Minnesota. And I said, oh, okay, well, let's try it. Well, I sent her a DNA sample. I sent her a check in my intake form, and I had no idea when she was going to be doing this session, but I felt horrendous. So I had to do something because nobody could help me. And so one day I was in the doctor's office again and trying to figure out what was wrong with me, and my health was spiraling down and down. And I'm in there talking to the doctor, and all of a sudden I started feeling different. And I thought, oh no, gosh, what now? What's going to happen now? And by the time I got home, I realized that the feeling was actually a good feeling. And I felt like I was floating on a cloud of bliss. And I was like, whoa, this is completely the opposite of how I've been living for months now. And I called my friend in Minnesota and I said, hey, did you do that session? And she started laughing and she said, yes. And she goes, it's just going to get better and better and better. And it did. Well, it turns out that I had Lyme disease in my brain. And it's Lyme is very, very hard to diagnose. It hides very well in the body. And this biofeedback, the SCIO machine, it actually scanned my system, and it sent corrective frequencies back to me based upon what was out of balance. And I felt it immediately. And she started to work with my brain waves, and I started coming back. And so I said, when can you get out here, and how do I get a machine? So I got a machine a month later on my birthday, and she came out and started training me. And then I continued training, and my health did get better and better and better. So for the next year and a quarter, I worked with the SKIO biofeedback. I worked with homeopathy. I worked with nutrition and healing my gut. And I was well in about a year and a quarter. And it was like day and night. And so I healed myself there. And then all was going well, and practice was going well. And then 5 years later, I got the diagnosis nobody else ever wants to hear, and that's, you have ovarian cancer. And I was like, you've got to be kidding. I was floored. I was absolutely floored. And so of course they wanted to do surgery, they wanted to do chemo, and I knew in every cell of my being not to touch chemo. My mother had died from breast cancer treatment,
Mm.
and we have cancer in our family, and everybody went through treatment and they all died. And I just knew not to do it. I knew if I was going to be here for my son, who was 9 at the time, that I had to do something completely differently. So I gave my good friend, Dr. Tony Jimenez, a call. He's down at Hope for Cancer in Mexico. And I said, hey, what do I do? And he said, get that thing taken out and get me your pathology report, and then we'll make a plan. And so I did. I had the surgery. I had a tumor the size of a melon.
Oh my
And
gosh.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
crazy.
I know, I know.
How did
And
you like do I mean, you must have felt like you were pregnant.
I did. Well, it was my son, my sweet, gorgeous, beautiful son. He said, "Mom, you're getting fat." I was like, "Yes, you're right," and I hated that. And so, being a body worker originally as a rolfer, I was palpating my belly, and I could feel this balloon sensation
Mm.
in my belly, and I'm like, "Wait a minute, this isn't my bladder. This is wrong." And that's when I went into the doctor, and that's when he had that horrible diagnosis. And but the funny thing was, he referred me right away to a gynecological oncologist up in the Bay Area, and I knew intuitively not to go right away. And so I just took my time and I spoke to Dr. Tony. And then when the time felt right, I really listened to what my body was saying. Then I went in. And I'm really grateful that I did, because what I know now compared to what I know then, now I understand how cancer develops and its cycles. And had I gone in sooner, I may not be here today. So I
Why
did
is
let
that? Well, I mean, I definitely want to hear more about your story, but why is that? Why what about the cycles that's good to not like immediately run to the oncologist and jump on the chemotherapy bandwagon? Why is waiting and planning out better?
Well, this is a whole type of work that I ended up studying at the deepest levels, which was based upon German New Medicine, and it's a type of work that talks about where trauma from early on is a trigger to cancer now. And so when you have had a trauma, a shock, some sort of a conflict that's happened, and you don't resolve it, you carry that literally on your brain with you until you can resolve it. So you'll see patterns play out in your life of the same type of trauma that happens over and over and over and over again. And it's your subconscious trying to get you to resolve it. So sometimes when you resolve these conflicts, after you've resolved it and you've finished it off and you've let it go and you forgive, and that's when a cancer shows up. And because while you're in that conflict, one of two things is happening. Either you're breaking down tissue or you're building a mass.
Hmm.
And otherwise, you don't typically have any symptoms other than you might obsess on things, you have a tendency to be cold, those types of symptoms, but you don't typically feel like something is going on in your body. So I had a very strong trauma when I was 3, where I was taken from my father,
Oh my
and that
gosh.
yeah, it registered on my brain as a deep, profound loss conflict. And I didn't see my father for 43 years. Yeah. And so my brain, as a little 3-year-old, how on earth are you going to resolve that conflict? You're not. You don't have the tools. And so there's actually, when you look at my brain scan, and I've learned how to read these now, you can see these trauma marks on a no contrast brain CT, and each one of those trauma marks represents a particular type of conflict, and that type of conflict correlates with a very specific organ. So for ovarian cancer, for example, it correlates with a deep loss conflict. For lung cancer, the trauma mark is on the lung relay on the brain, and it relays to feeling like I'm not going to survive or my family member is not going to survive. So you have these trauma marks on your brain, and some are resolved and everything's good, and some are not. So the longer you hold this trauma and it's not resolved, the more either breakdown that's happening to your organ or you're building up a massive tissue. So for all these 40 some years, my ovary, my right ovary was breaking down into microperforations.
Mm.
And then years later, when I went and I met my dad, my brain said, ah, guess what? She just resolved that lost conflict. She has her daddy back. We're going to send amino acids to that area of the brain and then send the signal to the ovary to heal. And so if you can imagine all that time I held the conflict, my ovary was breaking down, breaking down, breaking down. And so when it sent the signal for it to heal, it had to send nutrition to the ovary, and so it swelled, and then finger-like projections grew out of the ovary and all around my organs to grab nutrition to bring it back to the ovary. And so for ovarian cancer, there is a 9-month cycle that it takes from the moment of resolution of the conflict, the loss for me, to the end of the healing phase. That's 9 months. So I waited a long enough time so that by the time they opened me up, those finger like projections that had reached out of the ovary looking for nutrition had retracted back into the ovary, and the tumor was dying from the inside out. And so it went from being a very destroyed ovary to swelling to the size of a melon, to finger-like projections going out, then they retract, and then it dies. It takes 9 months for that particular type of cancer to resolve itself. So had I gone in sooner than I did and not listened to my intuition, they would have opened me up and they would have found finger-like projections all over my abdomen, and they would have probably just closed me up and sent me home to die. But I was wise enough to listen to what was going on inside of me and try not to get sucked into the fear. That's what I tell a lot of people is be really careful. You don't want to get sucked into that fear pattern because it can take you over.
Mhm.
And then it can create a new conflict. Oh my gosh, I'm afraid I'm going to die. Then they end up with lung cancer or liver
Mm.
cancer. And that's how quote unquote metastases happens on the emotional level.
Mhm.
So each type of cancer has a specific conflict or shock or trauma that's associated with it. So by the time they took it out, it was still huge. It was a big melon, but there were no fingers. It was all compact, and it had already started to die off when they took it out. And that was the perfect time for them to take it out. And so I'm just really grateful that I listened to my intuition and I followed what I felt. And yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Now, I am really excited that one of your specialties is German New Medicine, otherwise known as meta medicine or, Dr. Hammer's work, because I'm a really big fan of it. And
Mhm.
I studied it back in 2005. And when I was becoming a master practitioner and trainer of neurolinguistic programming, that was part of my training to understand that mind body connection and all the science behind it. And so I have this very like layman's understanding, but that you're a specialist in that, a practitioner of German New Medicine. So I definitely want to come back to this subject and have you share with the listeners the how Dr. Hammer came
Mhm.
to discover this? Because a lot of people go, that sounds like hocus pocus. And then you hear what Dr. Hammer and the research he did to prove this, and it's amazing. But let's come back to your story. So you don't go through chemo radiation, you go through surgery, and you do it in the right timing. And then what happened?
So after that, they wanted me to do chemo. So I sat down in front of my doctor and he, said, "You've got to do chemo, blah, blah, blah." And I knew not to do it. And he sat there and called me a fool 3 times for not doing chemo. And then I said, "May I speak now?" And I told him, I said, "I've chosen to work with a natural practitioner who has a clinic in Mexico, Hope for Cancer. And these are amazing treatments that have been working for some of my clients who I've sent down there. And this is going to be my choice." And he finally just shut up. And so that's what I did. I went and I did a natural program with Hope for Cancer, and I did it at home. I did a home program. I was able to do it at home. I was able to work. It was great, and it was pretty phenomenal. They have this really great treatment called sonophotodynamic therapy, and it's using sound and light to destroy cancer cells, and it was just fabulous. So I took a natural approach in everything that I've ever gone through. It seemed like the medical community could only help me to a certain degree. And then I had to take my own health into my own hands and responsibility for my own health and figure everything out in a different way. So in a way that supported my immune system, and it supported me on all levels, body, mind, and spirit. So after I went through that, I did train in German new medicine, and so I started working with my clients, adding all these tools, adding in the skio, adding in homeopathy and more nutrition and functional nutrition and um, German new medicine. So we're looking at the emotional components, we're looking at the physical, we're looking at the energetic. And then I started doing more functional nutrition types of things, looking for more root causes. Well, I had had a mouthful of amalgam fillings. So I did a heavy metal challenge test and I found out that I was lead and mercury poisoned.
Oh,
Yeah. And I was like, okay, the bottom line is you have all these root cause factors. You have toxicities, you have infections, you've got emotional traumas, and you've got to pick away and chip away at each layer and each level in order to get well. And so I have been just nonstop at just, cleaning out my system because we've had this toxic load our whole lives. And we keep adding more every single day unless we focus on cleaning things up. So I had to work on chelating and getting the heavy metals out. And that was a really trippy experience because you can get really stiff and a lot of pain. And so I had to learn how to do that properly. And then I realized, all right, I have liver flukes in my liver.
how did you find that out?
Yeah, so that was through a process of quantum reflex analysis. With Premier Research, I had learned this technique, and I found that I needed to go on this liver fluke protocol. Well, I had been doing um, parasite protocols for years, but I never really saw anything come out. I always thought, oh, maybe they're microscopic or, well, honest to gosh, I did. This is gross, but I did a coffee enema one day, and I had hundreds of these things come out while I was on this protocol. So they were up in my liver. They were suctioned on like a little snail. And then I put enough anti-parasitic formula into me over a period of time so that when I did that coffee enema, they let go and they just flushed out. And that was around the time that I had the cancer. So I truly believe that the metals, the parasites, the emotional trauma, they were all triggers and all pieces to the pie that contributed to the cancer. And so, now I investigate root causes on every level.
Hmm.
So we look for metals, we look for parasites, we look for Lyme disease, and then we moved into a house that had mold, and we didn't know it.
Mm.
And so we all got horribly mold poisoned to the point where I was sleeping in a tent in the backyard for 8 months until we could find another place to go to. And mold will do a number on you. You may not see it, you may not smell it, but it can be there. And all my life, I had lived in homes with musty basements and in the Midwest, and all those mycotoxins were building up in my system, and those metals were building up in my system, and then it's the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Hmm.
So having to clear myself from mold it's kind of a constant job because the layers are so incredibly deep. But what I find as you go through and you find all these root causes, and they're different for everybody, of course, you get stronger and stronger and stronger, but you've got to dig deep because they've been there a really long time. So, we've been working really hard on clearing ourselves from mold for several years now. And, it's just, you just got to keep looking. So if you've got some sort of health issue, always look for those root causes. Doctors want to give you a pill, which might mask or band aid the symptom, but the symptom is your friend. So, for example, if your hormones are out of balance or if you can't lose weight, look underneath, pick up those rocks and look underneath every rock to try to find out why. Most people just put the dirt underneath the rug and it builds up and it builds up, and then that causes the problem in the end. And so, people genetically have different size buckets, and some people can hold a lot of toxic load before they trip a disease, and others can't. And
Mm.
so it just, it depends on all those factors. The more of these root cause factors you have, the bigger issue you can trip. So as your cells become more and more inflamed, imagine your cells being completely surrounded with beautiful cholesterol and saturated fats. And then you've got these little receptor sites that come out of those membranes of your cells, and that's where you absorb your nutrition. It goes into your cell. It uses the nutrition and the hormones to make energy, and everything is supposed to work really well. But if you're exposed to um, chemicals and mold and Lyme and parasites and all this stuff, that creates inflammation on that cell wall. And therefore, it blunts the hormone and nutrition receptors, so you can't get the nutrition in, and then you can't get the toxicity out. And when those cells become really toxic, imagine putting a fire on in your fireplace and closing the flue and the windows and all the smoke that would fill up in the room. That's kind of what happens in our cells when we have a lot of inflammation on the cell membrane. And so when they become really toxic, your cells will either die, or you may trip and turn on weak genetics. And for me, ovarian cancer was one of my weak genes. My grandmother died of ovarian cancer as well when she was 36. So we need to do whatever we can to reduce the toxic load that we're getting from the outside, and then do whatever we can to clean our cells up from the inside so that we can lighten the load and stay real healthy and vibrant.
Mm. I heard this saying, and it's similar to what you said, is that those people with a weak constitution often live longer than those with a strong constitution. And when I heard that, I was like, that doesn't sound right. This person with a strong constitution lives longer. And they're like, no, a person with a weak constitution will take the time to do self-care.
Hmm.
And the one with the strong constitution will let their body build up the toxic load, and they'll just kind of like push through it. So they feel sick and they're like, I'm going to push through it. And they're stubborn, and they push through it, push through it, push through it. And then they just drop dead.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, my dad being an example, dying at 61 of his heart exploding. I say he died of a broken heart from my mom dying. A few days ago was the 15th anniversary of my mom's death from cancer, and
Mm.
that is what led me on the path to being so passionate about this subject, about helping people learn how to gain their health back, so that they can prevent what happened, my mom died at 55 and she was the healthiest person I knew. She took supplements, she exercised 5 days a week, she ate all her vegetables. She was, fit and skinny and full of energy and could run circles around me. Literally, we'd go for walks and my mom would do this thing where I'd be speed walking and she would speed walk around me, doing laps around me. Like, we were on a big dirt road out in the country, and she was like, come on, let's go, let's go. And she would do this, like, running around me, like running backwards, running forwards around me, doing circles. And and I'm like a teenager, and I'm trying to go as fast as I can, and she had short legs, and she was just Speedy Gonzalez. She was so fit. And but she was one of those people with a really strong constitution. Although she did take care of herself, there was all these factors, like you said. Like, she was taking pharmaceuticals that were taken. It was hormones that were not bioidentical, and they were taken off the market for causing cancer the same week she was dying of cancer, the same week she died. And so we know that was a factor. She had a lot of anger and she had a lot of, unresolved negative emotions. And then there's a factor of emotional toxicity. She had amalgams, so there's all these things that could have added up that sort of were those, the straws, right? And then that was her, where it broke. But someone with a weak constitution will often slow down, seek out help from someone like you, and look to heal before it gets too bad. And so I thought that was interesting because we tend to celebrate the people who have a strong constitution in this society. We tend to celebrate someone who can push through it and go to work with a cold. And yet we're celebrating the exact opposite. We should be celebrating someone who goes, you know what, I'm kind of feeling off. I'm going to go seek out help now before it gets too bad.
Right, 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 right. Yeah, it's important that we do pay attention to what's going on inside. And if it's time to rest, hey, it's time to rest. You burn that candle on both ends, it's going to catch up to you. So, yeah, self-care is huge, and most people don't do it,
Right.
unfortunately.
Right. So now, share with us. You've got this like huge list of all of your trainings and your education. So besides the fact that you are a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, and that you're a Rolfer, which I love. I love Rolfing. What other sort of credentials have you built up along the way to be this expert?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm a lifelong student, so I don't stop learning.
Me too.
It's
I bet all my listeners can relate because people who listen to podcasts often are like you and me, the lifelong learner, right?
Absolutely. So I've studied homeopathy. I've studied, I'm a certified health coach. So, we can look at nutrition and look at all the factors. I do three types of biofeedback. I use the SKIO, the Zyto, the Evox, and they're all fabulous. I work with frequency specific microcurrent, which again is energy medicine that was invented back in the 1920s. And I have seen miracles happen with this.
Is that
It's
the
fab.
Rife machine?
No, it's not. It's different. And this you actually, Rife you can use from a distance. This you actually have to use on the person. And they use it with NFL players, for example, when you get a concussion. And I've used it with NFL players for concussion and injuries. And you can set the machine to do a concussion protocol to take down the trauma and the inflammation in the brain and in the nervous system very, very quickly in one session. You can mix and match the different frequencies with the condition, the problem. So something might be inflamed or infected, and you can say, where? Okay, infection in the liver or inflammation in the medulla. So it's really cool because you can get very specific frequencies to target the problem. And it's great for emotional stuff. People will come in, sometimes they get all upset, they're angry, they walk in the door, or there was an accident, I'm late, and I'll just put them on the microcurrent, and in like a minute, they'll be totally chilled out. The anger will be gone if you put them on the right frequencies. So I'm a big fan of microcurrents, and Yeah, so and Rolfing, just so people know, Rolfing doesn't have to hurt you guys. Back in the day when Ida Rolf was teaching her students, they were watching her work, right? And she knew exactly what she wanted. She would go right for it. And her students would try to emulate her, and they were hurting each other. They were like bruising, and, it was not good. And so Rolfing has come a really long way. And if people don't know what Rolfing is, it's structural integration where you're um, basically making space in the myofascial system. So you've got fascia that can get all bunched up and it can lock your body down. So people sometimes get an inch or more in height after I finish doing a Rolfing series with them. So it makes space in your body so gravity can flow down through your body beautifully and you feel this sense of lift instead of being pulled down. So, but it doesn't have to hurt. And so, what I love to do is I love to mix the frequency specific microcurrent. I put on these electro gloves and then I rolf the person with those frequencies running through my hand. So, if they have some scar tissue in their abdomen from a surgery or something, you can run anti scar tissue frequencies through your hands and rolf them at the same time. And it literally melts the scar tissue under your touch.
Oh, that is so cool. My experience with Rolfing, I went my first session, my husband and I had to park like really far away. It was like this weird kind of office building and we had to park down the street over by the coffee shop. And so we walk there. My husband's 6'7". His legs are so long, right? I'm tall for a woman. I'm like 5'10". So I'm like, but I have to like jog to keep up with him, right? So I constantly he's walking ahead of me, and I'm like, come on, slow down, walk with me, like walk beside me. And I get in there. He does a session. He focuses. I mean, he does my whole body, but he's like, wow, your IT bands. Oh my gosh, we got to work on that, right? Like who doesn't? And then going back to the car, I kept noticing as we're walking back to the car that my husband was behind me. And I'm like, what's going on? I got the session. He basically just sat there and watched, right? And I'm like, I'm walking and I'm walking. I'm like, come on. Like, why are you walking so slow? And he's like, I'm not walking slow. And I went, oh my gosh. And that's when it clicked. It felt as though in my first session that he cut like the Pinocchio strings. Like he cut these strings that were holding me back, like these strings that were like holding my legs back, and just it felt as though my legs could finally move for the first time in my life. And I was
Mhm.
walking naturally without thinking about it faster than my husband.
Yeah.
And then that was just it. I was like, I am such a believer of Rolfing. So that's so cool that you take it to the next level by using this a frequency energetic medicine.
Yeah, no, it's great. I had a similar experience. My best friend is a mold and Lyme doctor, and she loves all the things we do, and we collaborate a lot. But she had walked the Camino years ago. And on her first day walking that Camino trail, her lower legs just exploded. They just blew up, and she could hardly walk. But she ended up doing the Camino anyway, even with these like really, really swollen legs. And that was years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago. And one day we were hanging out. And I was just, let me work on your legs a little bit. I see something going on. So she let me work on her lower legs. And it basically released the trauma from the Camino all those years ago. It was under all those layers that had built up. She stood up and she just went dancing across the floor. She goes, I feel like Barishnikov. She was dancing just like a ballerina because her legs felt so light because that was removed. So it's a great thing. If you haven't tried it, find somebody in your area, see if you resonate with them and get some work because and especially if you're thinking about getting pregnant. I've had people who have come to me before they've gotten pregnant because they want to be in better structural alignment so they can hold the pregnancy better. The baby has less
Mm.
restriction in there. The baby will come out more aligned. And then get this is even better. Um, that when the child learns how to walk, if you and your husband are aligned with this sense of lift through the rolfing, the children they basically imprint on you and they mimic your walk.
Mhm.
And so you'll watch a whole family walk down the street with the same limp because the father broke his leg when he was 12, but nobody else needs to walk like that, but they have imprinted on him and they've taken on his pattern.
Mhm.
So if you get Rolfed before you get pregnant and then the child watches you walk, they will have a much better structure. My son, um, he has a great structure because both myself and his father are Rolfers. And so that's how he learned how to walk. And so he has this great structure. So yeah, I highly recommend it if you get a chance to do that.
That's cool.
Yeah, and let's see, what else do I do? I'm a cellular detox specialist, so I help my clients to find the root causes. Number one, what are they? Right? We have to find out what's driving the inflammation, and then we have to figure out strategies and techniques to safely detox what's inside that cell and get that garbage out. And that's critical if you have tripped an autoimmune disease, if you've got cancer, and even if you just want to stay healthy, because a lot of times people think that I don't have inflammation because I don't have pain. And that's not necessarily the case because you can still have inflammation at the cell level and not have any pain at all in your body.
Mm.
And I'll have people come in and they'll take this simple little urine test and we'll put it in this vial with this chemical and it has a reaction. If there's a lot of inflammation on the cell membrane, it turns bright red. And so I can tell where people are at right when they walk in the door and we do a few simple little tests. And then you can actually, as they detox, you can watch that color in the vial as they take that test over a period of time. It gets lighter and you can tell that the inflammation is going down. And there's
Mm.
another test that's really great, and you guys can do this at home. You can go to vcstest.com, I believe it is, or just Google VCS test. And this is a visual contrast test. And this is a cool test. Dr. Shoemaker, he's a mold expert. He came up with this test. So if you have a lot of inflammation on your optic nerve, you will not do well when you take this vision test. So it basically, you can do this on the computer, although I do find that it's better if you can find a practitioner to do it within the office. I think it's more accurate. But you can get an idea from taking this test what you're toxic from. How about that? So
Ooh.
yes. So if you don't do well in the heavy metal category, that could be a clue that you want to investigate that. If you don't do well in the biotoxin or mold category, you may want to investigate that. If you don't do well, like in the chemical category, you may want to investigate that. And many times they cross over. But that's a great test for you guys to do. Just make sure that if you do it, that you follow the directions exactly. And I believe they want you like 18 inches from the screen when you take that test, and for more consistent results. So, but I find that the in-office test, if you can find a neurologist or a practitioner like myself who has one, get it done because that can be a marker. So as you detox at the cell level and you get this gunk out, you can go back and do a VCS test and you can find that you can see more as the inflammation on the optic nerve is reduced.
That is crazy.
Yes.
So, because I've been noticing one of my eyes is getting blurry. It's kind of weird, and it only does it certain times of the day. And I'm like, what's going on? And this might be like you said, inflammation on the optic nerve.
Yeah. Yeah. Or it could be related to your liver.
Really?
Some of you, yeah, liver and eyes go together. So a lot of times I can tell by looking at somebody's eyes that they've got liver stress.
So do you do iridology?
I don't, but again, I'm a lifelong student and I you you correlate a lot and you pick up a lot over the 25, 26 years that you do this.
Hmm.
And yeah, so you may want to do a liver cleanse, or you may want to do take some herbs to support your liver, or you may want to do a coffee enema, which helps to clean up the liver. A lot of people would never think of not changing their oil filter in their car, right? Would you,
Hmm.
if you have your car for 20 years, you change your filter, right?
Hmm.
Otherwise, your car will seize up. Well, most people don't realize that they need to clean out their liver or support their liver because it acts kind of like that oil filter in your car, and over time it gets really gunked up. And if it's gunked up, you're not going to process your hormones very well. So a lot of time people with thyroid problems may have a gunky liver because they can't
Mm.
convert that T4 to T3, and then they end up on medication unnecessarily, yada yada.
Mhm.
And so you want to support your pathways, like your kidney and your lymph and your liver, and make sure all those toxins, as you detox them out, you're getting them out of your system. So I'll use a lot of time binding agents, like charcoals and clays and things like that, in the gut, so that when you recycle your bile, so your liver makes the bile, it goes into the gallbladder. Well, that bile will collect toxins as your body filters toxins. So if you don't have a binding agent in your intestines, when the bile goes to recycle, then you will just recycle those toxins and reabsorb the toxins.
Mhm.
So you it's a good idea to utilize binding agents to grab those toxins like a catcher's mitt, grab them, pull them out of your system so you don't recycle and reabsorb them.
On a day-to-day basis, though, I mean, would you be eating clay and charcoal every day, or on a day-to-day basis, do you just say eat more fibrous vegetables like leafy green vegetables because that kind of pectin
Mhm.
helps to grab the toxins and pull them out of your body, out of your colon, helps them to carry it out of your body.
Yeah, I do both because even though I live like a really clean lifestyle, because I'm not going back to cancer, I'm not going back to Lyme, right? I still use binding agents before I go to bed because your organs go into like auto clean mode at night when you go to sleep. And so they're processing toxins and they're pushing them out while you sleep and your organs are cleaning. So what better thing to do than take some binding agents before you go to bed.
Right. I had this
You s
vision of like the Jetsons, like kind of like auto cleaning. I'm like how you hit your you at night before you go to bed, you turn the dishwasher on and then you go to bed, right? And I'm just imagining like you get in bed and all of a sudden it's like the dishwasher from the Jetsons is like cleaning out your organs. I just had that visualization.
That's awesome.
And then so like, the dish soap that you put in the dishwasher is like the clay, the charcoal or whatever that, like you said, the binding agent. You put that in every night and then your gut starts scrubbing itself all night long.
Yes, it's great.
Yeah.
Then you're not gonna reabsorb what you're trying to get rid of. It makes so much sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you do take binding agents, before you go to bed, make sure that it's an hour or 2, typically 2 hours away from any medications you might take, because it'll bind to those too. So
And what if someone takes supplements right before bed, like probiotics or um like a CalMag, you know?
yeah, yeah, the binding agents are gonna prefer, a more of a toxic load. It's gonna go over after that first, but I try to still separate them
Mm.
just to be sure. So you could even take your binding agent earlier and then take your CalMag or whatever you're gonna take before you go to right before bed. So just give yourself a little bit of a window just to make sure that you're not, losing what you think you're getting.
Do you sell these binding agents or do you
Oh,
recommend certain
yeah.
brands?
Yeah, I do. I use a lot of different brands because there are so many wonderful products out there, and I'm a real stickler for clean products. So if you have other ingredients listed on your label down there, like magsterate and citric acid and all this stuff, you kind of want to stay away from that stuff. So I use things like Systemic Formula's Bind. It's a great binding agent and it uses a carbon, and it also has things like a little bit of Cascara sagrada and magnesium. So if you tend to run constipated, it helps you to move your bowels, because once you grab onto those toxins, you want to get them out as quickly as possible.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I use Systemic Formulas. I like their bind. Um, I like the Biocidin. They have a GI detox, which is a clay and a charcoal combination that works really well. There's Pectosol C out there that you can use as well. There's a lot of different ones, and you just want to make sure that you get a clean one, whatever you do. So anytime you're looking at a supplement, try to look for anything else, any fillers, any excipients, anything that could be making you more toxic. I had a friend that I went to high school with, and he called me up and he said, "Yeah, I know you're into this nutrition and stuff. And could it be that when I stopped taking my Centrum, do you think that's why my" I know, right? He goes, "My feet stopped hurting after I ran out of Centrum. I'd been taking it for years and my feet stopped hurting. Do you think there's a correlation?" I just was stunned. But yeah, because that stuff has got so much toxic
Don't
stuff in it.
don't trust supplements that are made by pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm sort of, I'm not gonna buy a vitamin from a pharmaceutical company. That's not their wheelhouse. Let's go find a company that only makes supplements and that's really dedicated to making high quality supplements and stick with that.
absolutely. Yeah, I know, it's crazy. You know, uh, uh, Premier Research Labs is another really good brand. If you can get your hands on that, they have a really nice MediClay FX.
Hmm.
Is fabulous. And these things are really great for detoxing mold too. So if
Mm.
you've had mold exposure, then these are really good binders for mold as well. And
Wow.
and
Is
if
there?
you had go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. No, go on.
If you've had mold exposure, you may be needing to take these binding agents throughout the day too, in between your meals. So
Mm.
it may be that you need them more than just at night.
Is there anyone for whom you would suggest not to take binding agents?
Well, pregnant women, you got to be careful, with supplements and all that. If you're going to be releasing a lot of toxic load and you're pregnant, you need to talk to your doctor about what you can and cannot take. People who are on a lot of medications need it, but again, you need to talk to your doctor. If you've got like a kidney transplant or something like that, and you're on some crazy meds, I'd be really careful about how you take things and when you take things. So, but for pregnant women, I'm just really careful not to stir up more toxic load by doing this and then
Mm.
creating toxicity for the baby. So
Yeah.
you got to
Yeah.
just take it real, low and slow if you're pregnant.
Mhm. Okay, that
Hmm.
makes sense. So these binding agents, I mean, what am I? They're binding to toxins, but do they also help the body release toxins? Because you're kind of the way you said that made it sound like it would kind of stir up the pot.
It could. It depends on how toxic they are. So they're not going to naturally necessarily pull things out of your bones, like lead is not going to come out of your bones from a little bit of clay. But if you're taking like Pectosol C, right, that tends to have an affinity for lead, and that could stir the pot. And that could kind of create a little more circulation of lead, heavy metals in your system. So, it's just if you're pregnant, you're not going to detox anyway. So, wait until after you breastfeed and are done with that. Like I have a gal right now, she finally stopped breastfeeding, and now um, we had her do a stool test because we were trying to figure out what was going on with some things she was dealing with, and she has blastocystis hominis, which is an infection, and she couldn't really treat that. We didn't really want to treat that while she was breastfeeding because that's going to stir up a lot of toxic load with die off, and that will go into the breast milk, for example.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we just, I like to be like extra careful with, some of these kinds of things just to make sure that people aren't creating more toxicity.
Yeah, what a lot of women don't realize is when we breastfeed, it really does pull. It can have an effect of pulling toxins out of our body, the breast milk, and then giving it to the baby. So it's so important to eat organic and even be like switch to organic before you even give birth, and make sure that you're fully nutrified before you give birth, before you conceive. Before you conceive, you switch to organic and fully nutrify with supplements as well, so that all your nutrient tanks are filled up,
Mm-hmm.
and then just eat as healthy and as whole foods and organic as possible, because even in the when babies are born, they test the blood from the placenta, and they find that there are pesticides and herbicides and all kinds of nasty stuff. So the baby received that in utero, and which is really sad because anything that we eat is going to kind of get
Mhm.
concentrated for the baby, and especially with breast milk because it's so in a healthy way, so fatty, can have a an effect of pulling toxins out of the mom and giving it to the baby. So we really want to be extra careful.
Yeah, and another thing when you're pregnant, the thing about lead that a lot of people don't know is that lead gets passed on from mother to baby for 4 generations.
What?
Yeah.
That's so
So,
crazy. How do they know that? Do they test the half-life of the lead?
yeah, the lead is actually stored in your bones. And so when you're in utero as a little fetus, you're pulling nutrition out of your mother's bones
Mm-hmm.
to develop, and they're pulling the lead too. So that's how I think I got my huge lead load was probably through my mother. And then my mother passed away at age 48 of breast cancer treatment. So
Oh.
she was probably triggered by a high mercury load, a high lead load, and
Mm-hmm.
who knows what else. So, but just be aware now if like you were saying about eat organic and eat really clean and get lots of good nutrition in. If you're thinking about getting pregnant in, a few years, you may want to spend a year doing a really good scrub of heavy metals
Mm-hmm.
and making sure you don't have parasites and stuff like that for a year or so before you even think about conceiving, because then you'll pass less of this stuff onto your baby too. So that's just a
Wonderful.
thought.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And people would definitely want to work with you with all with all your background. It's wonderful. Now I hear that there's a lot of things that you do that you'd want to be in person with someone.
Hmm.
Um can you work with people over Skype?
Oh gosh, yeah, I work every day. I've got clients all over the world. Skype is awesome. And one of my favorite things to do over Skype is the emotional work and helping people to get to the root causes of why they have the cancer or why they have that autoimmune disease. And we get on Skype, and sometimes we'll even mix and match the Evox biofeedback. They'll have a hand cradle on their end, and the Evox is cool to work with emotional issues that are triggers to cancer or some other disease, because what it can do is it can speed up your recovery time. And so, let's say you got them on Skype, they've got an Evox on their end. The Evox, as they're talking about their issue into a microphone, the Evox is picking up on the frequencies in their voice and says, oh, okay, she's got these frequencies, but she's missing these. And then so the Evox sends back the missing frequencies to the person through the internet,
Mhm.
and then they can shift their perception really, really well. And then they resolve the conflict and they move on. It's kind of miraculous. So it's cool because you can do the Evox through the internet, you can do the Zyto through the internet, and you can do the Skio remotely as well, but you don't even need the internet for that. So you could be on the moon and you could send somebody frequencies, and it
Oh,
works.
yeah. If it wasn't for the fact that I was so into and studied so much quantum physics, this conversation could be in the realm of like wackadoodle, like hippie crunchy granola weird stuff. But there's so much science now. Like look at CERN, and they're trying to I mean, if you really look at what CERN it does, they're basically talking about these particles that pop in and out of our universe, our existence, our plane of consciousness. And part of quantum physics is that there's like there's no space, that a particle can be here and then on the other side of the universe and then be here again, or at the same time be in two places. And that's what they're sort of seeing with CERN. And so all these kind of like very sci-fi, what seems like fiction is really true. And so they, now they're finally proving, why is it that I can sit down and like send Reiki energy to someone long distance, like level 2 Reiki, and that person, their pain goes away, or they feel, they feel better, or they're able to walk, and all of a sudden, where they couldn't walk before, because they're in so much pain. And even though it's like, well, what's going on? That person's on the other side of the world or whatever. And it's because on a quantum level, there is no space between us. That's it. And I think that's so cool that through energy and consciousness and vibration, that so much can be achieved. And we can't ignore that, because I know we've gotten, as in a society, we've gotten to think like, if I can touch it, then it's real. And if I can't touch it, it's not real. And it's in the realm of wackadoodle.
Mhm.
And so we got to remember, when we start to dismiss things, we have to go, wait a second, is that my belief system, or was I taught that? Was that belief system passed down to me? Do I really not believe in energy? Cuz look, the sun is energy. The sun is plants can take sunlight and turn it into food. That is miraculous. That is turning energy into food. Why can't we be affected by energy as well?
Mm.
If a plant can grow because of sunlight, you know what I mean? And if we go out in sunlight, our body can produce vitamin D. Like, we are affected by energy. We have to keep remembering
Absolutely.
that. So people who might be skeptical or think that's kind of weird, energy and energetic healing, emotional healing, and mental healing play a major role in physical healing, and they all go together. And that's the entire realm of holistic medicine. So I love that you look at every body. When you look at a client, you look at their physical body, emotional body, mental body, spiritual body, energetic body. You look at all of them, and to help get to the root cause. It's very healing, to have someone listen. Like, I see that you went to the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, and
Mhm.
as a health coach, I'm actually I'm graduating their program right now, in September. And what I love
Yay.
about what Joshua teaches is that it's that listening, having a client just have a coach listen to them and advocate for them, can sometimes help them heal so many things, just because they have never had someone sit and just listen to them and
Mhm.
be a
Very
voice for
true.
them, and just hear them out. Kind of like we go for days without getting a hug, and we
Mhm.
feel kind of grumpy by Friday. We feel, maybe by Thursday or Wednesday, we feel kind of pissy and grumpy. And it might be because a lot of people go days without even touching each other, days without hugs, days without, weeks or months without ever your feet touching soil, like touching grass, or touching plants. Sometimes years we go without touching nature. And we're so disconnected from nature, from each other, from touch. And there's been that proven studies that babies will die if they're not nurtured, if they're not touched and loved and cuddled, if there's not that human contact. And we need it too. And so a lot of time we kind of dismiss emotional healing, mental healing, energetic healing. We dismiss that and only focus on physical. Go to the doctor, get more pills. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to eat healthy. I'm going to get my, medication or whatever, because they're always thinking on the physical level, but they're neglecting their emotional, their spiritual, their mental, and their energetic. And so I love that you bring all the realms together, and you get a lot of great results. Can you, just off the top of your head, share some stories of success with us, of clients who have been able to heal, like cancer, and maybe fibromyalgia, or Lyme, or the things that are people often suffer from, that are really hard to
Mhm.
get on the other side of.
Oh yeah. So, yeah, balance. It's all about balance. You are totally right. I have a great story of a young woman who she came to me. She was in her 30s and two small kids, awesome kids, awesome woman, incredibly stressful job. I think she worked in the real estate business, and it was just incredibly stressful. And she had breast cancer was her primary, and it she had metastasized bone cancer. So knowing what we know about German new medicine, recall healing, that type of emotional work, uh, she came to me for stress reduction and biofeedback. So okay, great. Well, once I figured out what was going on with her case, I'm like, all right, well, we need to do the emotional work as well. So I realized that it wasn't just one conflict. The breast cancer has one conflict, and then the bone cancer has another conflict. So she had been on chemotherapy, and the chemo stopped working. I mean, she had bone cancer. Oh my gosh, all the way through her spine
Mm.
and down her hips and into her arms, and it was extremely painful, and breast cancer, and they stopped treating her, and they basically sent her home to die. And so she came to me for some stress reduction, and I said, all right, well, we think we're going down this path, but we're going down this path too. And so I think I saw her 3 or 4 times, and she brought me her PET scans, and we worked on the emotional stuff, and we worked a little bit on the physical, but energetic with biofeedback and emotional root cause work. And she had 3 PET scans that she brought to me later on. One was from June 2014, where you could see her bones just like somebody had taken a machine gun and just l- bullets of cancer all through her spine. Just horrible. And then we did work. We started in June, and we did 3 or 4 sessions. Then she got a PET scan in September, and all of those bullets of cancer were almost completely gone. And this is off of chemo. And the only thing she did was the work that we were doing, the energetic and the emotional work. By December, the same year. So we had a PET scan June, it was horrible. September, it was really, really good. December, it was completely gone. Every bit of cancer. That was 2014. And I saw her like 2 weeks ago. And she's doing great. She's completely cancer free. She's happy. She quit that horrible job. She's traveling in Italy right now with her family for a month. And she's as happy as can be and grateful as can be, because now she's here for her kids. So she knew that there was something more, and she opened up herself to look at other options other than what she was doing. And she ran with it, and she did the work, and she's here because of it.
I love it. I love it. What was the can you share what the conflict was,
Hmm.
or around the bone,
Hmm.
or just for people who might, so that others can understand like what conflict causes bone? Is there one conflict causes all of bone cancer, or is it like if it's in the spine it's this, if it's in an arm or leg
Hmm.
it's this?
Yeah. So she had 2 cancers. The first cancer was breast cancer, and so breast cancer, there's always um, details about um, the type of breast cancer and stuff. But the main conflicts with breast cancer, first, before we get to bone, is there is either somebody's been torn from your breast, taken away from you, or there is a home or a nest conflict. So for her, it was on her right breast, and it her work, she was there so much, it was almost like a second home to her. And so the conflicts were so intense with her work and her second home that this created the breast cancer. So for her, it was that particular one. So, right and left breast, there's slightly different meanings and where on the breast, but in a nutshell, that's kind of what it was. So it was the conflicts at work that tied to the breast cancer. The bone cancer, that ties to a really deep self devaluation. And depending upon where it's found in the body, that can give you more information as to what she's feeling self devalued about. So, for example, she's right-handed, so she had 2 kids, and she would hold one baby on her left hip, right, so that she could cook with her right arm, stuff like that. So, in during the course of this, horrible job and treatment and whatnot, she had this self devaluation conflict about not being a good mother,
Mhm.
and her left side tied to her children, her right side tied to her job.
Mhm.
And so so we had to clear these emotional conflicts that she had so that we could get her from a conflict phase into a resolution phase and into a final healing phase. And then she could walk away from the cancer. Now, what the chemo does is, first of all, chemo, doesn't work 97% of the time. And you wonder, well, why doesn't it work 97% of the time? Because you've got to deal with these other factors, especially the emotional trauma, that if it's still active on the brain, you have to convince the brain the trauma is over in order to turn off the program. And then if you're going to do chemo, then that's when your chemo works. Sometimes people subconsciously resolve that conflict, and sometimes people have to go through a conscious process to resolve that conflict.
Mhm.
So anyway, so she resolved these conflicts, and then she started healing and healing and healing. But the chemo, when people go on chemo, that will actually stop the healing phase from finishing itself. So if you have the type of cancer where you're in the conflict and you're breaking down tissue, and then you resolve the conflict, and then you have to repair the tissue, the repair phase, if it's a big conflict you've held for a long time, the repair phase can actually be a cancer, right? And so if you have that cancer and then and it's actually in a healing phase and your body's healing, but it's healing with a cancer, they'll come in with a chemo, and it'll stop that healing phase from finishing.
Mhm.
And it basically turns it off and it makes it go away temporarily, but the program's still running on the brain. And so when they take away the chemo, the cancer comes back because it may not be finished on the brain. You finish it on the brain, it'll finish in the body. You have to support the body.
Mhm.
So you support it with the natural therapies that the body thrives on, and you'll have much better success.
And this is part of Dr. Hammer's work.
It is.
I'd love
It
for you
is.
to share with the listeners the story of Dr. Hammer and the science that he developed to come to his conclusions about the root cause of disease.
Okay. Yeah. And Dr. Hammer just passed away, I'd say about a month ago.
Oh,
Yeah.
bummer.
Yeah. He had a stroke, and, he had a really hard life because he was a hard German, hard, kind of hardcore German um, persona. And so that's how he worked. But he was a medical doctor, and his son was accidentally shot. Um, in Italy by an Italian prince, and it was an accident, and the son was in a coma in the hospital for a long time. It was very traumatic for he and his wife, as you can well imagine, and eventually the son died. And that was that lost conflict I was talking about earlier, with that tied to my ovarian cancer. Well, um, it was very traumatic for both he and his wife. His wife developed ovarian cancer, and he developed testicular cancer. And he's like, "Wait a minute, I don't understand. We eat well, we're healthy, we take care of ourselves, right?" It's always that case where the person was completely healthy, like your mom, and then something horrible happens, right? And so he had to figure out, he was like, "I've got to figure out how this happened. I know that there is some emotional component tied to this, because it just doesn't make sense otherwise." So he started interviewing his cancer patients, and he started finding out, okay, well, all liver cancer patients had this particular trauma, or all ovarian cancer patients had this particular trauma. And he figured that out, that there was a trauma, a specific trauma that tied to a specific cancer. And then he went further. He was using no contrast brain CT scans to look at the brain of his cancer patients. And then he mapped out the brain. Okay, this area is for the ovary. That was all mapped out. And he found that there were trauma marks on the relays of let's say the man had liver cancer. There would be a trauma mark on the liver relay on the brain for that liver cancer patient, or the ovarian relay on an ovarian cancer patient. So he mapped all of this
And
out.
when you say trauma mark, do you mean the centrifugal rings?
Yes. So there are, when you look at your brain scan, and I've done mine twice because I needed to know if my cancer was done or not. And it is. You can tell if these marks on the brain are, if your cancer is finished or not, by looking at it. So there are these rings that look like tree rings, these marks on your brain on specific areas. You can tell if the conflict is active because it still looks like a tree ring mark, or if the conflict has been resolved, as in my case with the ovarian trauma. When I met my dad, I resolved the loss. Amino acids went to that area on my brain. They healed over, and now it looks on my brain scan like a white circle instead of a tree ring circle. And so you can tell that it's not coming back. So when I originally was starting to learn German New Medicine, I asked my teacher to look at my brain scan because I went there specifically needing to know, because I was obsessed. Is this thing coming back? I have to be here for my son. What do I need to do? And she looked at it and she said, "Congratulations, it's not coming back." And it was just such a huge sigh of relief to know that the trauma was completely resolved. It was resolved subconsciously when I met my dad. I had no conscious realization that it was even a conflict in the first place.
Hmm.
But it's a natural process that our bodies go through. And Dr. Hammer just, he had to figure it out, just like I had to figure it out, because we needed to know. And so he mapped out the brain and he correlated the traumas. And I studied and I studied all the different levels, and I took Dr. Tony with me, and we studied as much as we possibly could, and then we studied an offshoot of it, recall healing, and we study this, and we put it into practice in our work. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to try to disprove this because it just is the opposite of what we learned. Wait a minute, you get a cancer when you're healing? That doesn't make sense. And so I tried to disprove it, and he's right. I just have to say he's right. I have not been able to disprove his theory at all. And so the man was brilliant. And unfortunately, he was ostracized. He was thrown in jail. He was kicked out of his country because, of course, he was a big threat to the pharmaceutical industry.
And he did over 30,000 studies. There were 30,000
Hmm.
case studies. He worked with 30,000, people and did all these scans. And it wasn't just like he just, a few patients. It was a major, major project.
Yeah, I think it was over 40,000 actually. And then people said, "Oh, those marks on the brain, those are just artifact. It's just what happens when you get a brain scan." So he actually had a letter signed from the Siemens Corporation, the people that make those CT scans, and certifying that that indeed was not part of an artifact or something that the machine was creating. It actually was something that was being shown on the brain.
Now you have to get a no contrast scan.
Hmm.
How do you convince the doctor to allow you to have a no contrast scan?
For me personally, I know doctors. So
I know people.
I know people. But, yeah, you don't have to go get a scan. If you have you don't if you have a cancer or you have an autoimmune disease or something, if you know what it is, then you can backtrack. So I've done the work. I've had 2 brain scans. You guys don't have to go out and get brain scans. If you know what the conflict, or you know what the conflict is, then you know what the cancer is, you know what the disease is, and you can backtrack it. You can look for the pattern, you can go back and you can heal the original trauma that started it. So you guys don't have to run out and get CT scans of your brain. If you have a practitioner that can help you walk through that, then they can find it and they can help you, direct you in the right direction.
So let's just go through a few. Can you go through a few common illnesses and their conflicts?
Sure. So we talked about breast cancer being a conflict with your home or your nest, or someone is being torn away from your breast. Liver cancer would be a lack conflict, or a survival conflict. I don't have enough to survive. I don't have enough money to survive. So that's what ties to liver. Colon cancer, and there's always intricacies about like where exactly in the colon is it, and that will give you more indication about what the conflict is specifically about. But in general, if you have a colon cancer, for example, that's growing in a conflict active stage, what happens is when you hold on to anger, and specifically anger at a family member or someone you feel is family to you, and you're not letting it go and you're holding on to it and onto it and onto it, that that conflict will build a tumor in your colon. And so the name of the game is to not hold on to this stuff, and it's to walk through whatever process you need to walk through, and there's lots of them, um, to let go of this and forgive and you know get this out of your body, out of your mind, out of your emotions, and so that it doesn't keep damaging you and send you down that road to a cancer. So colon cancer is unresolved internal anger at a family member. Lung cancer is oh my gosh, we're going to die conflict. So an example would be, let's say there's a huge war going on and you're living in the community where the war is happening. You've got bombs going off over your head. You're terrified your family's going to die. You're terrified you're going to die. And so, what your body does in an effort to try to help you live is it will create tumors in your lungs to give you more alveoli space or more air capacity, more breath capacity, so that because your brain is thinking it's going to die and you need more air. So it's building tumors while you're in this conflict of living in this environment of war. And then when the war is over, ah, gosh, it's done. We're not going to die. The amino acids go to the brain and go to that lung relay where that conflict is being stored. It heals it there, and then it sends a message to the lungs that we no longer need those tumors for extra alveoli because we're going to live. We're okay now. So, what happens in this case is tuberculosis bacterium is, if it's not vaccinated out of you or neutralized from vaccines, it will be released out of your system and it will go to the areas where the tumors are, and the person will get fevers, they'll get really tired, and that TB bacterium will start to eat those tumors and start to break it down. And so if you have a colon cancer or a lung cancer, let's say, and you're building these tumors while you're conflicted, while you're angry, while you're afraid, and then it's released and you let it go, and then the TB bacterium goes and eats these tumors, you'll probably start bleeding as the tumors are being eaten. So if you have a colon cancer, those that TB bacterium will eat the colon tumor and it'll bleed. You'll pass blood through your stool, and then you'll go running to the doctor and you'll say, "Oh my gosh, I'm bleeding," and they'll do the test. They'll say, "Oh, you have colon cancer. We have to do chemo or radiation right away." Um, Same thing with lung. You may start spitting up blood and you've got fevers and you're exhausted. Those are signs that your body is breaking down those tumors and you need support to get you through that phase. When they go do the chemo and the radiation and stuff, they stop that healing phase from happening and it doesn't get a chance to finish. So it's really nice when you can work with a doctor that has access to supportive treatments to be able to help you move through this natural process of conflict resolution and healing. So this whole process, this three-step process, where you've got a conflict, you resolve it, you heal it. It can be a cold or it can be a cancer. So it's the same process. You have let's say I'm really angry at you, Ashley, and I'm holding back and I don't say anything. You know, I need to say something to you, but I'm not ready to do it. I'm angry. While that's going on, that conflict is going on. My throat is kind of breaking down in these little tiny micro perforations, and then finally I just let you have it. I just, Ashley, I got to say this and that to you, and I say it, and then I release it or resolve it, and then my body goes into the healing phase, and the tissue in my throat has to repair. Well, if I've only been angry at you for a few days or a week or whatever, I'll end up with a sore throat as you repair in the healing phase. If I've held on to it for years, that's when the healing phase is really intense and there's a lot more damage that needs to be repaired. So that's when it shows up as a cancer. Does that make sense?
It does. Now, what about my understanding with lung cancer though, people often notice they have it when they start to have problems breathing or they breathe less or like there's
True.
less air. So at what phase are they realizing that they have it at that point?
They're in a conflict active stage. So they have not resolved the conflict and those tumors are growing bigger and bigger and bigger. And so they're getting obstruction. And so they'll either go to the doctor due to shortness of breath or obstruction types of symptoms, or they'll go because they've resolved that conflict and they've moved into a healing phase and they're spitting up blood, for example. So, a cancer, most people don't die from the cancer itself, they die from an obstruction or they die from treatment.
Hmm.
But as Dr. Tony, my good friend, says, you've got time to stop and think about this in, like this model and look at your options in such a way as, are you in a healing phase? All right, let's go and support that. Or do you need a surgery to remove that obstruction while you work on these other things? I'm not throwing allopathic medicine out at all. It's a combination. It
Hmm.
needs to be done responsibly and with some of these other concepts in mind, and you'll have much better success. That's the message.
Mm, wonderful. Well, it's so fascinating, and it's good to have that well-rounded background because I love that you can look at those different things with your clients, and just take them into consideration with your clients. Especially since my understanding is the conflicts, oftentimes are things like you said we don't even know that that was a problem. Like it's something like happened 4 years ago and it might have been really big, like maybe we got fired from a job or we broke up with someone, or it could have been maybe a car accident or something, and it wasn't, we thought it was done and over with, but we didn't
Mm.
realize that the emotional trauma of it was so, we didn't have the tools to handle it at the time, that's when it really festers and eats away at us, right?
Yep, absolutely. And the fascinating thing with this work is that let's say you had that car accident 4 years ago and it brings up certain things for you emotionally and physically and whatnot. There's a way to actually, and I teach this to people, how to create a timeline of your life, and you can actually backtrack and you can find similar experiences to that trauma earlier on. And usually within the first 10, 15 years of your life is where you'll find the original seed trauma. And then if it's not resolved there, then it will keep playing out over and over and over, kind of like Groundhog Day, in an effort to try to resolve it. Your brain is trying to find a solution
Mhm.
to the conflict. So you may end up having a car accident, or you might end up having something emotional happen to you down the road, but it's kind of similar to something that happened when you were 5. And the key to getting out of that cycle is going back and doing the emotional work um, with your own 5-year-old self and finding expression. And then when they can resolve it there, then it kind of domino effects forward, and then that pattern stops playing out.
Mhm.
It's fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that sounds a lot like timeline therapy,
Hmm.
which you almost pretty much described, and that's something that I'm a master practitioner and trainer in, and it is, you go to the root cause, and it's that gestalt. The neurology stores like it. For example, like you said, you were in a car accident, but that is a similar experience to you falling off your bike or you falling off your skis or you maybe almost drowning, and so you kind of grouped all those different memories along your timeline together in one gestalt labeled the times I almost died. And then when something scary happens, and then it's like that, in that moment you're actually lighting up every event in your past, in that that neurology, the gestalt, the chain of every time you were afraid you were going to die gets lit up. Because it's unresolved. It's not just that one time. And so you got to go back to the root cause, the beginning of the gestalt, and gain resolution, and that helps gain resolution along all those memories. It's so neat how how our neurology works in terms of storing unresolved negative emotions, and how um easy it is once you start to do emotional work, how easy it is for the body and the mind to gain resolution, let go. Because I think in the modern day, have this idea, this Freudian idea that Freudian therapy is like a talk therapy, and you have to sit on a couch for 200 hours, and you have to talk about your entire childhood, and you really just are dragged through the emotions you never truly resolve. And I mean, and look at the language of, if you watch the news, which I don't recommend you do, because it's like traumatic in and of itself. But if you look at the news, you'll often see it's definitely victim language. So they'll say something like, oh, she'll, someone narrowly escaped a fire. She'll be living with that for the rest of her life, and and people just nod their head and accept it. Because when we watch TV, we're really kind of zombies at that point, like allowing the what they're saying to pass through our filters and just go right into our unconscious mind, and we just generally accept what they're saying is true. And so the newscaster will say things that are reinforcing this idea of victim mentality, that when something bad happens to us, it's often going to be a trauma that happens to us for the rest of our life. Like, oh, victims of, they're being molested, like they're going to live with that for the rest of their life. But they don't have to, right? They
Mm.
don't have to. And yet in society, we have kind of reinforced this idea that if you've had trauma, you're broken, and you're for the rest of your life. And we need to step away from the common idea, these major common misconceptions about healing. Healing is easy. The body can heal itself. The mind and emotional, the heart we can heal. We can let go of trauma. We do not need to hold on. It does not need to be our identity or personality. And our body is miraculous, and it can heal. We don't need to feel like we're broken and then have to go to the doctor and get a drug. And that's what, for over 150 years, what the pharmaceutical companies have been reinforcing over and over again through the media, to try to train all of us to think that we are broken and need a pill and need a doctor.
No, you're so right. And that's exactly why we don't watch TV, because it's not my world and I don't want to get sucked into that mindset when I know that that's not my reality. So I know that I need to take responsibility for my health on all levels, and my son does, and everybody in my world needs to do that for
Hmm.
themselves. We can guide each other, we can help each other, but really it comes down to us. And so, if you've got something going on, start empowering yourself. My role model is Wonder Woman. Yes. Just, find that inner power and just go for it, and stop listening to some of those stories about victim. You are so, so, so right.
Hmm. Yeah, and just notice what when you hear the languaging out there, notice what you accept to be true. Like, just keep asking yourself. It's kind of like 1984. If you haven't read the book or watched the movie, go do it. Because in the first few minutes, you only actually need to watch like the first 15 minutes to really get the point. The point is, like, the government has a ration on chocolate, and I forget the exact number, but it's something like, you used to be able to have 25, I don't know, pieces a week, and now all of a sudden or a month, and now you can only have 20. And the way they announce it, they're like, hey, good news, now your rations are 20 pieces of chocolate. And everyone's like, yay. And whereas, hello, they just lowered the rations by 5 pieces. And it was just, he Orwell does such a great way of demonstrating how we are controlled by the media, and by commercials, because the languaging is so manipulative,
Hmm.
and it plays on the fact that we're going to just allow, like, just accept what they're saying to be true. And so just notice your belief system and start questioning, start going, okay, the newscaster just said, for example, oh, flu season's coming, and we're all going to get the flu, and so we all need to go get our flu shot, or whatever he says. And you're nodding your head, you're just, because he says a bunch of, it's a yes set. He says a bunch of things like, oh, it's fall time now. And it's flu season's coming around because it's getting colder. We all need our flu shot. And all of a sudden you realize that you're accepting everything he said to be true, because he said three true statements. You cannot deny fall time's coming, it's getting cold, and people are getting the flu. He said it's a manipulation technique. He did a yes set. So he says three yeses. And then the fourth thing he says, whatever he says, unconsciously, you will agree to it. And they use this just, there's many, many different techniques. If you want to learn how to kind of detect the BS out there, you can look into the trivium, which is a 2,500-year-old way of critically thinking. And so if you study the trivium, you understand the language patterns they use to manipulate us. But they do that, and then we all of a sudden have this belief system that we never decided it was our belief system. We inherited it from the mainstream media, and we're a bunch of sheeple that are just going around accepting these falsehoods. And the idea that we can't heal, for example, is definitely one of those falsehoods. And the idea that we are going to hold on to our trauma is another one. And I love that you have stepped out of that. You and I and the other health nuts. It's okay to be the black sheep. It's okay. You're in good company. I would rather be the salmon swimming, the opposite direction than everyone, because the herd, if you want to, be like everyone else, you're going to live like a statistic. So I don't want to be the statistic out there, which is 1 in 2 women are going to have a diagnosis of cancer. 1 of the 3 people, diabetes or pre-diabetes, all those statistics, that if you live like the masses, you will become a statistic. We have to kind of completely go against the norm and start to question our own belief system, because a lot of our beliefs that are ingrained in us are not ours. And that's why I love what you're doing, because it's outside the box. We got to be outside the box, but it is based so much in science. Let's talk about your website. I'm pretty sure all of us are curious. I mean, with all this really cool stuff you can do remotely, and also stuff, I mean, man, I'd love to come down and just see you, because I all the cool things you do in person with your clients. So tell us about your website. It's trinahammack.com. And of course, the link to that is going to be in the show notes of today's podcast at learntruehealth.com. How do people work with you, and what kind of programs do you offer besides working with them one-on-one? And also, I see, if you, scroll down, you have email list they can sign up for, and they'll receive the 5 fatal cancer triggers and how to avoid them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, so I work one-on-one. I work in groups. I am getting ready to launch a program right now that contains a lot of what we talked about today, actually. So it's called Canceling Cancer. And we go through and we work with the physical toxic load, and I teach people how to actually detox themselves at the cellular level. And it's like a 2-part type of a program. So the first part ties to the physical detox and what's driving it, and what kind of changes do we need to make, and how do we get this stuff out of ourselves. And then the second half is this emotional stuff. And what are the techniques that we use to be able to resolve this trauma? How do we walk away from a disease? How do we unwind this mess that we've got ourselves into? So that program will be coming up very shortly. It'll be available on the internet. We'll have group calls, we'll have a Facebook group, and I'm really, really, really excited to get that out there, because again, I'm all about empowering you. And so you can go out there and do your mission. So I'm out here doing my mission. Ashley's doing her mission. Everybody is here on this planet to do something special. And in order to do something special, you've got to be on your game. And so if you've got a health condition, maybe you've got to just, it's your mission to get through this and then teach other people, be an example, whatever. But these are going to be tools for you to be able to get your health to where you want it to be. So I'm really proud of this and I'm really excited to get it out to everybody.
Very cool. Very cool. And so what does it look like to work with you one on one as well?
Well, one-on-one, like I say, we can do in-person work. Typically, I'll work with somebody in a year-long program or a 6-month program. Typically, my clients, even after a year, they're signing up for another year because, again, look at all the things that we need to do. We have so many root cause factors that need to be addressed on so many levels, and these things take time.
Mhm.
And so I have people come in and we do a huge assessment. We figure out where they're at. We figure out what are you going to need, and then we develop a really individualized program just for them to get them from here to there. So, and you never know how many layers are going to be in there. So it's very individualized. People can live anywhere in the world. I've got people in Switzerland and Italy and Australia and all across the United States and Canada. And there's a lot that we can do remotely, so that's not a problem. But any program that we do create is very individual, based upon what you need and how to get you out of the hole that you're in.
Awesome. Love it.
Mm.
Love it. Do you have any more? I know you shared one. Do you have any more stories of success that you'd like to share with us? Just because it's so much fun to hear them.
All right, do you want to hear a non-cancer story?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do
Okay.
non-cancer story.
Okay, so it's not always about cancer. It's any conflict again can become any kind of disease based upon where it lands and what it was all about. So I had this kid come to me. He was 26, and he's a young man, and he wanted to be out there dating. But he came to me. I don't even know how he found me. He was local. And he was a student, and he came to me and he had a condition called hyperhidrosis. So that's where you are constantly sweating. And I mean, I shook his hand. It was cold and it was wet. He was it was just
And he
like,
was
oh my.
popular with the ladies.
Yeah, well, the poor guy, he wouldn't even hold a girl's hand because he was so embarrassed. And so this was really putting a damper on his social life. And I'm like, I think a doctor, yeah, the doctor next door sent him to me. He didn't know what to do with me. Go see the girl who does the biofeedback. So he came over and we sat down, and this was more emotional work. And we did energetic work too with it. But what it was he had been living with this for 10 years. And so we backtracked in his experiences, and we found the seed experience that turned on the hyperhidrosis. So what happened was he was when he was 16, he was invited by his teacher to stand up in front of the whole school in the gym and give out awards to the sports teams. And so he and his teacher were giving out the awards, and he was announcing them. He was doing a great job. And then he said something incorrectly, and his teacher corrected him in front of the whole school.
Oh,
Yeah. And
ouch.
yeah, I know she didn't have to do that, but she did. And he was mortified, absolutely mortified. He wanted just to melt into a puddle on the spot and disappear. And in that second of that perceived trauma, she didn't know she was causing a trauma. She had no idea. She was just, trying to say something correctly. He took it on as a trauma. It hit his brain, his body, his psyche all simultaneously. And he started to sweat. And he sweated continually while he was in that conflict because he never got a chance to say anything to her and resolve the conflict.
Mm.
He didn't say anything. So he stayed in this hyperhidrosis for 10 years.
Whoa.
And that totally put a damper on his love life, his social life, and he was really going down into this deep hole. And I said, "All right, well, let's do the emotional release work together." We found where it started, and so we went back, and I had him do some work together where we backtracked, and he expressed himself what he never got to express to her in a session, and it turned off the hyperhidrosis. Just
Whoa. One
boom,
session?
one session. Boom.
Wow.
Yeah, one. And I got a really cool note from him, I don't know, a few months later, and he's going, "I can't believe that it's still gone." And he took his life back. And so he's a perfect example of, here's a conflict, here's an embarrassing moment. It hit me like a trauma, and then it started this process in my body of sweating. And he lived in that conflict. He had those cold, sweaty hands, and then we resolved it, and then his body healed it, and it turned it off. And I haven't seen him in years. I don't know where he is anymore, but I'm sure he's doing just fine. So it doesn't necessarily have to be cancer. It can be anything. And it's just a matter of backtracking, using your emotions, using your feelings, looking at some of your traumas and experiences and putting it all together so that you can come to a point of resolution. And there's lots of techniques. And in that Canceling Cancer program, we go through all those techniques. I go through lots of things that you can do to be able to resolve the things that you're holding on to. So anyway, it's fascinating work. I love it, and I'm so honored to get to do what I do every single day.
That's cool. What about weight loss? Is there any emotional stuff around weight loss? Or is that kind of something different?
No, there's always an emotional component. So there's always an emotional component. So um, weight loss, or okay, so let's say weight gain, you can't lose weight. So what are you trying to protect yourself from? So here's the crazy thing that happens is we start putting weight on as a protection for some kind of trauma at some point, and then we start beating ourselves up for having the extra weight on. And so that creates more weight to protect ourselves, not only from the original trauma, but from ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so that just creates more and more and more and more fat around us to insulate us.
Mm-hmm.
And so you know that there's something going on that's stuff down there that needs to be resolved. Another piece to weight loss, root cause factor, is mold. So it's really pretty close to impossible to lose weight if you've got mold and mycotoxins circulating in your system to the level that your body can't filter it out. And so you may not think you're in a moldy environment, but you may be, or you may have been raised in one, and then the straw breaks the camel's back. And then that a lot of times is also a factor in not being able to lose weight, or you've got hormone instability. So these things are invisible. And that's why it's so tricky. You got to figure it out. Now, I have a client that I worked with that was sent to me by Dr. Tony many years ago. And she was this little gal who was bulimic.
Mm.
So, on the opposite end of the continuum, she would throw up 20 times a
Oh
day.
my
And
gosh.
yeah, she did that for 5 years.
Oh.
And she had been in the hospital on feeding tubes numerous times. And this was like her last shot. And she was visiting somebody in LA, and she was in a hospital and on a feeding tube, and they were about to release her. And she was referred up to me. So she got on a plane. She came to my office, and I cleared my whole day. And we spent the day together. And we used Evox, and we used these emotional techniques with recall healing and German new medicine. And we ended up working remotely every week. And this girl, I felt so badly for her. She was so young, and she had so much rage inside of her at her father,
Mm.
that from different traumas that had happened in her life, like clockwork. It was absolutely amazing. Like there was a plane crash, and there was a car accident, and all this stuff. And she was directing this anger at her father. It was something she couldn't digest.
Mm-hmm.
She just couldn't swallow it. She couldn't digest it. So therefore, she couldn't swallow and digest her food.
Mm-hmm.
And so until she was able to release that, she was stuck in the cycle of bulimia. And then it was like a miracle. One day we got on our call, and um, she stopped talking about her dad. She never mentioned him again. Whereas in the previous sessions we had worked, she was venomous about her father. And it was just like, it was toxic what was coming out of this girl.
Mm-hmm.
But when she got to the point of resolution, we used the Evox to help with frequencies. We worked with the emotional techniques. She never mentioned him again. We moved on to another subject. Each subject got lighter and lighter. Then she had an opportunity to earn a bed in an eating order facility, eating disorder facility, and she had to do homework to get into it. She had to write letters. And she earned her way into this program, and she graduated the program, and she's fine. She's great. She's successful. She's doing really well. But she had all this stuff that was inside of her that she couldn't digest. She
Mhm.
couldn't fathom. She couldn't process. And so therefore her solution was to throw it up because it
Mm.
felt horrible to try to push it down. But once she resolved it on the brain, and she was able to stop that pattern, shift her perception and move on. And I'm just so proud of her. I it you know, there isn't anything that we can't handle. If it's in your life, then it's in your life for a reason. There's a lesson there. There's something there that you need to get. And let that symptom be your guide.
Mhm.
It will, it's a clue. The problem with the medical field is that they cover up those symptoms, those clues. They don't go and, look for the root cause stuff. They put a band-aid on it, and we dig it up because we want it to be done and not affect you anymore. So she's a really great success story with bulimia. So there you go.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this with us. Um, I would love for you to leave our listeners with a challenge. Is there something you'd like them to start doing in their life, to make a difference in their health on an emotional, mental, physical, spiritual, energetic level? Give them some homework.
Okay, guys, I was a school teacher for many years. I I can give homework. I taught science and PE to middle schoolers. So I would say that if you've got something up in your life, then look at the emotions that surround it. So, how do I feel about Hashimoto's disease? How do I feel about whatever? How do I feel about this cancer that's in my life? And write down the first emotion that comes to you. And okay, this is the first emotion. I'm angry. And then I want you to look underneath that emotion, and I want you to see what the next emotion is underneath that. Oh, I'm angry. And under the anger is I'm afraid. I'm fearful. Okay. What is underneath the fear? Oh, I'm sad. Okay. What's under the sadness? Oh, I'm lonely. What's under that? I'm abandoned. And then go be honest with yourself. You have to be honest if you want this to work. You keep going under that emotion, go under the next emotion, all the way until there's no more emotions to be revealed. And then I want you to look at that set of emotions, and I want you to think about those emotions and what does it remind you of earlier in your life? And in that way, you can start to find your patterns of what you need to resolve. And that could be tied to your disease.
Wow.
So,
I just did that while you were talking, and
yeah.
I totally came. It was crazy. I wrote down all the emotions like you said, that
Uh-huh.
for me, not the I didn't write down what you were saying.
She's a good note taker.
Yeah. And then what came up for me, because you said, like, look at all of them and look at what it reminds you of. And the first, because I trust my unconscious mind, right? So the first thing that came to mind was an event when I was in first grade.
Ugh,
And I'm like,
right?
what? Like, what does that have to do with anything? But it's all that is like an event that has a lot of those emotions in it, and it was kind of traumatic. And so it's interesting that that might have been where it all started around
Yep.
this. So
Yep.
that's very cool.
Yeah, that's the seed. That's where the work needs to be done. That's where the emotional release work needs to be done. And so if you do that, and then you can start backtracking, and then you'll start seeing these types of experiences have been peppered throughout your life in an effort to try to be resolved. And that's why it's playing out for you now. There was a stupid study that came out a few years ago that said that cancer is just bad luck.
Ah,
And I was appalled. I thought it was like from The Onion and some, crazy April Fool's joke. But if something's in your life, it's not bad luck. It's something that is up for you to empower yourself to figure it out and heal it and move on. That's all. It doesn't have to be this long drawn out thing. It doesn't have to be hard. It might be a little emotional, but once you release it, you find this sense of freedom that you just feel really good and really peaceful and at ease. So, starting to look at your emotions and seeing how you're feeling, keep a little journal, maybe an emotional journal. What are the kind of things that come up for you? And that can be really helpful to start talking to your subconscious and tell the subconscious that you're ready to release this stuff.
Hmm. Well, I love that you brought this up. The study where cancer is just bad luck. Okay. Why would they like I like to ask people like, because we let's start thinking for a change, right? Like let's start really dissecting things and thinking about things and not just taking them at face value, because that's what the media has always has an intention. And I'll give you this example. The media would never, like the Wall Street Journal, whatever, would never, really publicly go about promoting natural medicine, alternatives that work to curing cancer, alternatives that work to healing diabetes. Like that just will not be all in the mainstream. Now you'll see like one or two things like, oh, doctors have, figured this or that out. Like you'll see some stuff, but you won't see these big corporations really, really covering what holistic medicine can do. And if they do, it's always kind of poo poo, or, oh, haha, look at this little human interest piece.
Hmm.
But you don't, that really doesn't work. And it's because where do their dollars come from?
Hmm.
They cannot cover those things because their majority of their advertising dollars comes from pharmaceutical companies, and the pharmaceutical company will not allow them will not continue to support them if they publish anything that would go against their interests. So anytime you're watching media, you're watching what the pharmaceutical company wants you to watch. It's kind of like 1984, whatever you're paying attention to is what the government wants you to think in 1984, in Orwell's 1984. In our case, the universe we're living in is any media, mainstream media that you're listening to. Just imagine who is actually telling you what they want you to think is the those who are putting the advertising dollars into it. And this isn't something because I'm some crazy, whack job, conspiracy theorist. This is a lot of journalists have left, mainstream, working in the mainstream, and have gone independent because they themselves have come out saying, we were gagged, we were on to, trying to expose certain things like cures for cancer, and we were gagged and told we can't because, we'll lose our funding. And same with research. It upsets me seeing all this, let's raise money for cancer. Well, you're not raising money to cure cancer, you're raising money to give to some research facility that's going to, because most of their dollars still come from the finding patentable cures, right? And so they're not going to actually be finding a cure for cancer. They're trying to find a drug they can sell to you. So whenever you see, let's go on a walk to raise money for cancer, raise money for MS, or raise money for muscular dystrophy, what it actually is let's go raise money to find a patentable drug that won't cure it, but that will be able to just sell to you. So we've got to start questioning things a bit more, looking a bit deeper, and realizing that the world is not what it seems, and healing is not what it seems. Healing's a lot easier than they tell you. And I love, Trina, that you do the work you do. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I definitely want to have you back on the show because you're such a wealth of knowledge and lots of fun to talk to.
Well, I just love chatting with you. And thank you so much for having me on. I love sharing this information with people so that they can be empowered and they can take control of their life again. So
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Awesome. Listeners, please go to trinahammack.com and you can find that link in the show notes of today's podcast. Enjoy what you heard today on your episode of the Learn True Health podcast. Did something move you, inspire you? Did you get great information that's going to change your life? Awesome. That's exactly what I'm here to do, is to help you gain your health back. Please turn around and share this. If this is something that's helped you in any way, share this with those you love. Love the Learn True Health podcast and want to support us? Awesome. You can go to takeyoursupplements.com and you can support us that way. You'll get access to amazing supplements that are just really great quality for a great price. And there'll be someone on the other end of the line to help you pick out your supplements that are right for you. That's takeyoursupplements.com. Or join our membership, learntruehealth.com/join. That's another great way to support our podcast, support our movement, and you'll be supporting yourself. Gain more information, wonderful videos, wonderful trainings, and you'll also be able to share those with those you love as well. So go to learntruehealth.com/join. Want something fun for free? Go to learntruehealth.com, and right there on the front page, you'll see where you can get our free cookbook. I spent a lot of time making it, and it was so much fun. It's really delicious, healthy recipes. And you can also get our 7-day doctor course. Right there, it's 7 days of naturopathic videos sent right to your inbox, and you can learn from top naturopaths on how to gain health naturally. So that's takeyoursupplements.com for wonderful supplements. learntruehealth.com/join to join our awesome membership, which is only open for a limited time. You can get our free healthy cookbook, and you can also get for free 7 days of wonderful naturopathic videos sent to you. Just go to learntruehealth.com and you'll see it right there on the front page. Thank you so much for being a listener, and thank you for sharing and helping others. Let's spread this information and turn this ripple into a tidal wave.